Well, good evening, viewers. Sorry about that little bit of delay. Welcome to our weekly episode of SCV Chat. This is week number 4. Let's get our normal introduction out of the way. The opinions and views expressed on this program are not necessarily the opinions and views of the National Sons Confederate Veterans, any division, brigade, or camp. Their opinions are ours and ours alone. I'm your one of your hosts, GCB. Here with one of our normals. I've got our producer with us. Say hey, producer.
Hello, everybody.
And AS is back with us after a week off. He could only put up with our shenanigans 1 week at a time. So we got AS with us. And introducing a new guest with us, the Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the SCV, J-Bo. So, how you doing, everybody?
Good, fine.
All right, awesome. Before we get started, would like to offer thoughts and prayers to 2 members. First of all, our Commander-in-Chief, our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family right now. He had some stuff go on in his life, and just want to lift him up in prayer, as well as our normal host, MDS. He has twisted his neck and is in the middle of a treatment, so y'all keep him in your thoughts and prayers, both of them, as we continue on throughout this week. Just want to check out to see if we had any SCV news from our folks. AS, how are things coming at the museum?
Oh, things are going great. We're doing some excavation work, some filling. Just leaving the excavation work. We're moving a lot of dirt out there. Hopefully, we're getting close to that certificate of completion.
Well, as soon as we get that, I know we're going to have it framed and matted and probably, laminated and everything else. Hopefully we can get it on some gold paper. As we mentioned last week, I believe it was the 15th was Law Enforcement Appreciation Day of August, something that we do every year in the SCV, just to thank our boys in blue that are out there putting their lives on their line. I know that my camp, we could not participate on the actual day this year, but today my camp delivered about 20 pizzas to our local police department, fed them lunch and hopefully supper too. But it was that was our gesture of saying, thanks for supporting our community. Anybody else do anything that y'all know of?
We're still planning some.
AS?
I was just going to say, I noticed a lot of camps doing what your camp did, provide a lot of meals for the police officers out there, and really just letting people know how much we appreciate what they do for us, not just for the SCV, but for all the citizens out there.
Yeah. All right. I don't think there's anything new in news within the organization. I know several divisions are starting to rehab their reunions. I know Tennessee, y'all have y'all's this weekend, 1-day business meeting.
Yep.
Mississippi, we have ours as well this weekend. If you follow my SCV page, you may see us go live for a little bit of it. In Mississippi this past weekend, we had a flag rally. Our state flag is embattled again. We had a flag rally supporting that and supporting the upcoming ballot initiative that we're working on. I got to speak on behalf of the SCV at that event, at least the Mississippi Division, and I completely winged it. And everybody's saying I did a great job. So there's a video of it somewhere out there. So
great speech.
Yeah, like I said, I just completely winged it. So without further ado, it's time for our weekly trivia question. I'm just gonna pick one off of out of random. Who was the only man on either side, Confederate or Union, who started the war as a private and ended as a lieutenant general? That should be pretty easy for all of us. I know that. I'm looking at J-Bo. He's smiling. I think he knows the answer.
Yeah.
I think Adam for sure knows. We're gonna give the chat a couple of minutes to answer about who it was.
I've turned chat off so everybody can answer the trivia question. This is the only time in the stream where, if you're just kind of stopping by, you can comment in the chat. So, if you do know the answer, please go ahead and we'll kind of give you some recognition for it.
And just throwing it out there that I am actually in the chat this week. So for those who are chatting right now, if you see MSSCV 007, that's me. I'll type the question out. SCV Maniac 1861. Give me a second. Let me get my trivia book situated.
All of us
Who
all of
was
us here is
the
trying
only
to
man on
pull back
either
the gun.
side, Confederate or Union, who started in the war as a
He and
private
HC are just
and
dying.
ended as a lieutenant general. That's it. That's into the chat for those who didn't hear it read. It's in there. You can give it do 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 do
Ooh, wait.
do
We'll get
do
copyright.
do. No, because I am off key, and I've changed it up a little bit, so we're not going to get copyright off of Sony Pictures.
You never know, man.
All right,
Sounds
this
right.
man, this myth, this legend, who is actually a friend of tonight's topic of conversation, was General. Anyone?
Go ahead.
Oh, SUV Maniac got the question.
Yeah, he did. Bedford Forrest. Yeah. Too easy. I know, but had to plug General Forrest in there. And as I mentioned before we jump into the topic tonight, he was friends with this man who Robert E. Lee called, I believe, a shining meteor on a clouded night, the Stonewall of the West, Patrick R. Claiborne. General Claiborne was or is a hero of mine. He a couple years ago when we had our national reunion in Franklin, had the honor of standing where he fell. So without further ado, I'm going to let the J-Bo talk about General Claiborne for us.
Okay, where would y'all like to start? Let's start at the beginning. Let's start March 17th of 1828, County Cork, Ireland. He was born. He was born into what I call a medium wealthy family. His daddy was a doctor. When Patrick Claiborne was about 2 years old, his mother passed and his father remarried. A lot of people don't know that he had a half brother, and I believe his name was Christopher. I believe that's correct. That actually come to America with Patrick Claiborne, and he ended up fighting with John Hunt Morgan and was killed in May of '64 in Virginia. But he made his way over here Christmas Day and landed in New Orleans. Didn't wait for an introduction, just headed up the Mississippi River. Ended up settling in Arkansas, stayed there for a couple of months, and ended up moving to Helena or Helena, depending on who you ask. And about 1855, he did very well there. About 1855, they had a yellow fever epidemic and killed a bunch of people, but Patrick Claiborne stayed. And he sat there and took care of a lot of people, and that very much endeared him to all the locals. Well, we all know what happened about 1860. And Helena, Arkansas, y'all can argue over which way to say it, did not have any kind of militia, and they ended up forming the Yale Rifles. And the Yale Rifles were named after, well, I've drawn a blank on the gentleman's first name, but he fell at the Battle of Buena Vista in the Mexican War.
Mr. Yale?
His last name, huh?
Mr. Yale?
Archibald.
Yes, Archibald Yale, that's it. Archibald, I forgot Archibald. But he fell at the Battle of Buena Vista. So they named them after the Yale Rifles. They ended up becoming the 15th Arkansas. And as we know, that was rolled up into Hardee's group. They were one of the original, one of the only few that could still keep the Hardee flag, even after they were supposed to go to the, what we would call the battle flag or the First National. They petitioned and were actually allowed to keep their Hardee Corps flag. Now that was a blessing and a curse. A blessing because all the men knew where it was, a curse because the enemy knew where to focus, because they could pick out that Hardee flag and come after them. He served very well. Claiborne served very well. In Richmond, Kentucky, he was on his horse and he leaned over to speak to I believe it was a Captain Polk. And while he was leaning over to speak to Polk, a bullet come through his left jaw, took out teeth, part of his tongue and everything else, and went out the right side. In a short period of time, he had to leave the field. But the actions he did that day and the orders he gave at the very end were allowed them victory in Richmond. He recovered in just a few months. He stayed at a local's home and he recovered in just a few months. And then I think most people know him more for what happened in November of '64. But there were a few things I think that really stand out before we get to November of '64. He wrote very much about quite a bit about what his men went through. At that time, they were a very strong army, but they were a very small army. They would repulse attacks. They would attack themselves. They would get attacked, stand their ground, charge, take those trenches, push the Union back into another set of trenches. And they would end up, after all these skirmishes, they would have one stalemate and 3 victories in a day period, but end up having to leave the field because they would start with 5,000 men, end up with 3,500 men. And the Union Army would start with 10,000. And by the time they rode their flanks up, they had 12 to 15,000. So the numbers, he talked about how the men actually, in the whole Tullahoma campaign and the whole Atlanta campaign, the struggles that they went through because they could win all of these little skirmishes and all of these trench battles, but then have to leave the field at the end of the day because they were just outmanned. I mean, they had 2 or 3 times in most cases, the Union did than they did. So that was a tough thing. And then one of the things he is probably a lot of people don't know about, but the people who do know about it was a letter that he wrote where he was actually talking about arming the slaves. Now, that would have never come to light because all of the copies of that were supposed to have been destroyed. But one of the men that had received a copy of this didn't destroy it. And after the man passed away was when it come to light that he had actually wrote this letter about arming the slaves. And it's one of the things that ended up being talked about the most, talking about how our Confederate veterans were going to be fit for derision. one of the things that people talk about the most. But then you have the Atlanta campaign. They end up south of Atlanta, out toward Lovejoy. They end up, Sherman makes his move and starts heading to the ocean. Patrick Claiborne brings his guys, and they come up back into Tennessee. It's pretty uneventful until they get to Spring Hill and Columbia. Of course, as we know, Spring Hill, nothing happened in Spring Hill. And Claiborne said on the ride from Spring Hill into Franklin, he was talking to General Govan, and he told Govan that he felt that he was going to be blamed because his men did not move, where his specific orders were to not move till the people beside him moved. Those people did not move, so he did not move. But he fully expected to be blamed for what happened. But then we get to November 30th of 1864. You mentioned Nathan Bedford Forrest just a few moments ago. On the back side of Winstead Hill, the south side of Winstead Hill, the Columbia side, there's the Harrison House. There is a painting, and that painting is Patrick Claiborne and Nathan Bedford Forrest talking, and they're standing in front of the Harrison House because those two men did meet at the Harrison House before the battle. Nathan Bedford Forrest took the full right Confederate flank and ended up over there toward what was the golf course that was called Forest Crossing, and he crossed the Harpeth River there a number of times during the battle. But one of the things about Claiborne is he went to the top of Winstead Hill and he took his goggles and he studied the layout. He talked about how formidable they were dug in. He took out a pen and a piece of paper and wrote vigorously for several minutes, and then stuck the book and the pencil and paper back in his pocket. And him and Govan had a few words. They were very calm words, very nice words to each other. And both of them were talking about how formidable what they were about to do. And Govan made the statement that if this is one of those days, then, this is going to be one of those hard-fought days. And Patrick Claiborne said, if we are to die today, let's die like men. So they lined up at the base of Winstead Hill, and you take 31 running right to the Winstead Hill now. You come off Winstead Hill, you're looking at about 2.5 miles before you get to the Union Earthworks, the outer bands of the Union Earthworks. And if you look a mile to your right, a mile to your left, that's how far the Confederates were stretched out. About a mile on each side of it. About 4 o'clock, they started off that hill, started marching out through there. And think about this. You have, when they went to leave Winstead Hill and they started marching toward the Union line, there were a few trees that were right there by the Carter House. And then there were a few trees that were over here, Osage orange trees that were on the far right. Other than that, it was wide open field. You could stand and see the Carter House. There were no trees, very little undulation. So you had a 2.5 to 3 mile march under artillery fire. And the Union started cutting loose on them. Now, Patrick Claiborne lined all of his men up behind each other. And they were in single file till they were to the point that they could get to where the small arms fire were. They were trying to keep the Union from blowing them up before they get there. They were in single file line. They come to that first set of Union earthworks, and Patrick Claiborne's men screamed, let's run these boys into the trenches. And they did. They rolled them up and they pushed them back into the next trenches. And they kept fighting all the way back to the main line. They just kept rolling them up and pushing them back till they get to the outer line. Patrick Claiborne has his horse shot out from under him when a cannonball comes through it. One of his aides rides up. His aide goes to get off his horse to give it to Patrick Claiborne. A bullet comes through and shatters his aide's leg. While Claiborne is getting on the horse, an artillery shell comes through the horse, knocks Claiborne back down to the ground again. He gets up, and in all of this den of fire and smoke, the man who probably saw him last was General Govan. And General Govan had this to say: the last I saw Claiborne, he was standing on the ground, his sword in one hand, his kepi in another, and he turned and he disappeared into the smoke. Saber in one hand, kepi in another, turned and disappeared into the smoke. When they found him the next morning, they went looking for him. They got worried about him through the night because he didn't show. And they found that he had a vest, and the last few buttons, the bottom of the vest weren't open, and they saw one bullet hole in him. He was loaded on an ambulance. He was laid by General Adams, who was also killed. He was taken to the Carton Plantation and laid out on the porch of the Carton Plantation with the five generals that had died there. 5 total, Claiborne and the 4 others. Then he was taken to Rose Hill Cemetery, and he was interred at Rose Hill Cemetery. Then something come to people's light, a conversation that they had when they were coming up. The Confederate Army was coming back into Tennessee. They come past Mount Pleasant, and they come through, headed to Columbia, and they come past St. John's Church. St. John's Church is a real unusual, wonderful, beautiful place that is really unusual because it was built by the Polk family for the Polk family, and the church is still there. They paused there for a few minutes as the army was marching by, and Claiborne said it would almost be worth dying to be buried there. At least that is the story. Well, he was interred there. He was removed from Rose Hill Cemetery, taken to St. John's Church. And in 1870, his adopted home of Helena, Arkansas, come and got him and took him home. It is interesting to note on this last little piece that when the boat was in Memphis and it was going to take him across and up, Jefferson Davis was there. A few other generals, Confederate generals that lived in and around Memphis at that time were there. And an Irishman come on the boat, and he asked President Davis if he could kiss the coffin of his commander, because this Irishman fought under Claiborne for so many years. And he told him he could. And this Irishman leaned down, made the symbol, and kissed the coffin of Patrick Claiborne. That is a quick summation of all of it. Anything else y'all want to talk about? Or
well, the producer did mention a good thing really quick before we jump onto another subject or another speaker. I know there's one question in the chat, and it's not a serious question, but I'll ask it here in a second. I'll give this chance for the chat to actually ask any questions they have about the brief overview. But what are y'all's opinion on his goatee? That's what the chat asked. That wasn't GCB. That was the chat.
Oh, it's very nice on him. I've seen a picture of him without it, and I think he looked better with the goatee.
Especially after he got shot in the mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the producer was going to put a picture of him on, and the first picture he sent to me was the one taken of him right after he was shot in the mouth. While we're letting the chat ask some questions, I'll go ahead and start on, how I was introduced to General Claiborne. I began reenacting a couple of years ago. Really getting into reenacting a couple years ago, and being a Mississippian, I focused on the Vicksburg campaign. That was it, because that's the battles we did, was the Vicksburg campaign. And it wasn't until I went east for an event to Chickamauga and began reading about Chickamauga and everything that happened there that I really began diving into General Claiborne's life. And I began studying some of the things that happened. And what a lot of people don't realize is that on, I believe it was the first day of battle, the September 19th, he was part of a night attack.
Yeah.
At sunset, Claiborne and his men launched an attack with 3 brigades in line. And in fact, the picture that the producer had up is one done by, I can't remember if it's Troney or Kunstler, but it's that is the night attack. They were, they fought from at least, sunset to 9 o'clock, which is much like the timing that we're having now. And night attacks just really didn't happen in the war because they've become disorganized, they become disheveled, and people would, get lost. There are some counts of friendly fire in there, but they were able to attack, and they were able by 9 p.m. to retain possession of the field there, and really helped set up the break in the Federal line for the next day. The only victory in the West, I might add. We did have another question, going on, or 2 questions come in. First question was, how would y'all compare Claiborne to a modern general?
Ooh.
I'll let the distinguished J-Boat take that question.
Wow. How would you compare him? How many generals lead from the front? That would be my answer. How many generals lead from the front? Forrest did, Claiborne did. To be 20 yards from the earthworks, the Union line, on the ground, kepi one hand, saber in another, and turn and disappear into the smoke. That's the leader.
Yeah.
Now,
I would say the closest thing we have to compare him to would be Stormer Norman Schwarzkopf from the First Gulf War.
That's as close as I think that we could get. We've never had generals since the war between the states, the way those generals fought. Even Stonewall, yes, he was behind his men a lot, but he went and he did a lot of reconnaissance work and worked with them there, and he was actually on the field leading. Lee was very much in the back, especially toward the ending part of the war, having things instructed. But you had Claiborne and Forrest, and many times they were the head of the line. Mm-hmm. You don't have generals doing that. I don't know that you can. I don't think it's a fair comparison, because for one thing, warfare is completely different. Then you had to look a guy in the eye, and now you can send a drone. So warfare itself is a lot of difference. I don't know that we can compare.
The only other one that I would compare besides, when I say modern, I'm, World War II, I would consider a modern war, would be Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who, landed on the beaches in Normandy. He was out there. That's why he won the Medal of Honor. He had just, gotten over surgery. He was having to, had to land with a cane, but I mean, he wanted to be there for his troops. That'd be the only modern comparison I could see out there. Now, this is another good question from the same commenter. How important is his legacy to the cause today?
Repeat the question.
How important is Claiborne's legacy to the cause today?
How important is his legacy to the cause?
To the cause.
To me, it's one of those that's almost indefinable. He was one of those that was willing to pay the cost. He suffered many times during the war, was injured many times in the leg, in the mouth, and ended up giving his life there. Of course, a lot of generals did. But how is it, to me, when you start talking about gallantry and duty, there was a sense of duty with Claiborne. If you read about him and you study about him, Claiborne's command by Irvin S. Buck, he uses firsthand experiences, and Irvin S. Buck was in the war with Claiborne, and they use firsthand experiences. If you read his book, you get a real sense of duty that Claiborne had. And to me, that is the purpose of our cause. We all have a duty to do. Let's all do our duty. To me, I don't know that it's measurable. Or any of them measurable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, because I usually start out every speech with either a quote from Claiborne or from Shakespeare. And his infamous quote, that, losing this or surrender means that the history of this war will, paraphrasing at this point, pretty much our children are going to be taught by Yankee school teachers from Yankee history books. And, our veterans are going to be, fit for diversion. That is the most prophetic statement that came out of the war.
Yeah.
On either side, and he was very prophetic in there, and his words, still ring true to this day, because that's what we've seen that happened is that the history and the struggle for the Southern independence, and indeed all Southern history has been misconstrued and definitely misrepresented by academia. So between that and his legacy, him being a general that, to my knowledge, did not own slaves. To my knowledge, that to the point where he was pro-emancipation, a Confederate general who was pro-emancipation. Not saying there weren't other generals, but he took the time to write an actual letter out, and got him in a lot of fire with his commanding officers. A man who would stand up for his beliefs. Not only his beliefs, before the war and joining the Confederate cause and fighting afterwards. That's something very, very commendable for him.
Well, and to even tie into what you were just talking about, Claiborne wasn't born here.
Right.
He didn't come over here till he was in his early 20s before he ever came over here. And to not be born here, but live here and realize the sense of duty and freedom and he talked about some of his reasons for being involved at the very beginning. He believed in freedom. He believed in what the South was fighting for. Yeah. He even talked about that. Claiborne himself did. Yeah. So, to not be born here, but willing to fight and lay it on the line because you believed in the cause of what the South was fighting for.
Yeah.
How much duty is that?
Yeah, and his main biographist, who wrote The Stonewall of the West, in the very first chapter, attributes some of that to the fact that he grew up in his life in Ireland was during a tumultuous period. There was another revolution there while he was there. His father, was actually one of the main voters in the county who supported abolishing the anti-Catholic legislation in Ireland. He supported what we would call home rule now. And that sense of freedom and independence and being denied by some empire definitely, I believe, had something to do with it, because the same cause that he had in Ireland was the same cause that the Confederacy essentially was fighting for. Which it's when you look at the immigrant makeup, there were a lot more immigrants that were in the Federal Army than there were in the Confederate Army. But that's because towards the beginning of the war, the southern ports were blockaded. What do you think, AS? You being quiet?
I was hard to get in a word with you two, but once you get talking about Claiborne, I can understand that. But I think you've covered it all. His legacy, I think, is really, he was a Southerner, but he's one of those people that they can't label. When I say they, I'm talking about the intellectuals that are trying to rewrite our history now. They don't know what to do with Claiborne because he came here in the 1850s from Ireland, and he didn't own slaves. He urged the Confederate government to emancipate the slaves, to arm the slaves. They don't know what to do with him. And I think legacy as a fighter, and not only a fighter, but his legacy of not owning slaves and being an immigrant, I think that's what he means to our cause. He's somebody that I think that we can rally behind. He's almost a pure warrior, so to speak. And what I really enjoyed about him, his pre-war life, reading about that, was that he was a self-made man, didn't come here with very much at all. But he came here with a limited knowledge that he had gained as an apprentice and was able to find employment that way. And through hard work, he became an entrepreneur and then a lawyer. He's hard to label. Our opponents cannot label like they can somebody else. They can't say, well, he was fighting for the slaves. He didn't own slaves. So I think he's a very important figure to the cause, and really enjoyed listening to Jason talk about him earlier and take us from the beginning of the war to the end. And if you've been to the field at Franklin and you've looked at it, people call these men cowards. There were no cowards that day that made that 2-mile march across that field at Franklin.
No. Something else we mentioned that he his adopted home was Helena, Arkansas. I've had Helenans tell me that it's pronounced Helena.
Yes.
Yes. But the Arkansas seceded after Fort Sumter was fired on. It wasn't one of the cotton states that originally seceded.
No.
He saw the call from Lincoln for 75,000 volunteers to quell the rebellion in the cotton states. He saw that, and I'm willing to bet again he saw just the same thing in Ireland. Something else we didn't mention that I personally thought was kind of interesting is the Confederate Army was not his first military service.
No.
Served in Britain's army?
Yeah. 41st Regiment of Foot, I believe it was.
Yes, you're right.
So, and for a man coming from that British regiment life, at SCV reunions and around reenacting campfires, there's always the what if question. What if so-and-so would have been in charge of the army instead of John Bell Hood? What if, and my thing's always been, what if Claiborne was in charge of the army? And I've had a lot of people tell me, well, he wasn't a West Pointer. He didn't, he was a good division commander, but he couldn't, may not have been able to raise that bar up. And I think he could have, because the British Army at that time, that was the age of empire where the sun did not set on, on British occupied soil. And being part of that regimental life, I think he'd have made a heck of an army commander.
Oh gosh, yeah. Like just the experience he got from serving in that army alone. People, think, after we beat Britain in the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, they just kind of kept quiet. No, they were still a powerhouse.
I mean, plus everybody also forgets his. Well, anybody know his best victory? Come on, J-Bo.
I would say Perryville. And I'm going to tell you why Perryville, and that's because he went and he got those wagon trains back at the very end. Because all the stuff that they captured at the Battle of Perryville, they were getting stuck in the mud, and he actually had been wounded in the battle. And while he was being tended to, he got the deal that they heard the order they were going to burn all the wagon trains to keep the Union Army from getting them because they couldn't get out. He asked to go and get those out, and they've got all of it out. Millions of rounds of ammunition, 30 artillery pieces, just a massive amount of stuff. So to me, I'm going to say Perryville because he went and he got back the wagon train.
AS, what you think?
Question, I'm sorry.
What's out of his entire military career, what was Claiborne's best victory, his shiningest moment?
Ooh, it's a tough one. I don't know. I liked them all. Kind of a safe answer there, but I don't know which one I would highlight the best. We'll say that what I thought was one of the best things he did as a military commander was when he was elected colonel of his men there in Arkansas. His regimental commander was very inept, and he actually put a standing officer under arrest. And how many people can do that and still stay in command?
Bedford Forrest and Pat Claiborne.
So I think that his ability to not only take care of his own men, but lead them in battle, everything that he did on the field is a result of that. And, it would be hard for me to highlight just one victory.
Well, I've got to highlight the one that I think is just the best. Ringgold Gap.
Okay.
Come on.
Yeah.
He's outnumbered by 12,000 men. He gets the victory. He's able to, hold off the Federal Army from completely catching up with the Army of Tennessee. And then the Confederate Congress passes an order of thanks for him and his division.
Yes.
And besides the monument in Helena, that's the only place really where there's a statue of him is there at Ringgold Gap. To be outnumbered by and I think that's also probably where he got part of his nickname, the Stonewall of the West, being able to kick that much butt there. But yeah, I mean, being outnumbered and hold off an entire Federal Army almost. I mean, I'm looking at the order of battle right now. We're looking at the 12th Corps, 1st Brigade, 3rd Brigade, part of the 15th Corps. And these guys were veterans. I mean, high veterans of the campaigns out west. They weren't those wusses up in the Army of the Potomac. Not saying that the Army of the Potomac was a bunch of wusses, but when you look at until Grant come up there, look at their 2 track records and compare them.
Yeah. Okay, here's you a trivia question.
All right.
Name the battle Patrick Cleburne was in which he was captured twice.
Are we going to open this up to the chat?
Sure.
All right.
The battle Patrick Cleburne was in. It's a different battle. It is a different battle. Let me go ahead and say that. But it happened during the time of the war between 61 and 64.
Well, it sure didn't happen in 65, Jason.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
While we're waiting on some people to comment, we'll see if you can take a look at that. That's the church where his father is buried in Ireland, St. Mary's. And if you look at that picture, that is very similar to St. John's Church in Mount Pleasant that he saw.
That is.
As he was making that ride from Mount Pleasant to Columbia to ultimately Franklin. And, it's always been a part of our local lore here that he stopped several riders in front of that church and said it's almost worth dying to be buried in such a place. And a few days later he was. It was the Reverend Quintard, Charles Quintard, that took his body from Rose Hill to St. John's. Just a little bit more local trivia there. If you're ever in Columbia, come to headquarters. There's a lot to see there. I'll be glad to show you around too.
It's on the Army of Tennessee Highway.
Yes. Well, it's 4 miles from my house. St. John's Church is 4 miles from my house. And there were 2 other generals that were temporarily interred there with Cleburne at St. John's.
Who are the generals?
States Rights Gist. I think he was moved back to South Carolina. Adams.
It was Otto French Straw that was buried with him there, and Adams. Okay. They were temporarily interred there. Otto French Straw, they got him and took him home.
Guess wasn't buried there originally?
I thought it was Otto French Straw, Patrick Cleburne, and Adams.
I think Jason's right. We still have General John Carpenter Carter is buried at Rose Hill Cemetery where they originally buried him. And the whole there was we had 1,300 Union soldiers in Rose Hill Cemetery that have since been moved to Stones River Battlefield. And the Reverend Quintard came and saw how close these generals were buried to the Yankees. He said, "No, I'll take them to St. John's. Way too close to them." So he wanted to separate armies.
Yeah, y'all who've been up there, there's a stone wall around the courtyard.
Okay.
I collect rocks. Give me a break.
Okay.
Oh, all right. Nobody in the chat's answered, so go ahead and enlighten us, Boshears.
Okay, it's not what you would call your typical battle. In March of 1864, there was a sudden and very large snow. They had a snowball fight, the Confederates did. Claiborne was command. He got captured. They released him under the deal that he would not come back and fight again. Well, he come back and he fought again. And this time they end up chasing him all the way back to his tent and capturing him inside his tent.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Now,
That's awesome.
tell me a general that would do that. Have a snowball fight with his men.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Golly, that's the leader I want.
Yeah.
Fight with his men.
Have y'all ever been to General Claiborne's final resting place?
I have not, no.
Oh, next time you're over this way, this side of the South, we need to go up there to Helena, and I'll take you over there. It's absolutely gorgeous. About a year ago, my sister's grandfather-in-law, try to follow that. My brother-in-law's grandfather passed away in Greenwood. Greenville. If you're from Mississippi and you're familiar with the Delta, you will get Greenwood and Greenville mixed up.
All the time.
They're both on the rivers. Greenville is where Slick lived, and it's right down the road from Cleveland and Clarksdale. You got to go through, they're up 61 over to cut over to Helena, and whereas the Mississippi Delta is flat, Helena is it's hilly. It's like Vicksburg, and he's buried on top of a hill, and he's got a beautiful obelisk. And I was sitting up there, and I watched a thunderstorm roll in across the river, or roll in towards the river because it's like the highest point in the cemetery, and I think one of the highest points in the city where he's buried, and it's in the Confederate section on the top of the bluffs. A guy from the Richmond Howitzers was also buried in that cemetery, which I thought was like probably maybe 5 feet away from him, which I thought was pretty cool. But sitting up there it was beautiful. It was quiet. They have the Helena camp actually has a memorial service the Saturday closest to his birthday, St. Patrick's Day, which I think is just awesome. Because Patrick Claiborne, born on St. Patrick's Day, St. Patrick of the Confederacy. Yeah. Anyway,
I understand that you can see his obelisk from the Tennessee River. I mean, the Mississippi River. Excuse me.
Well, there's a lot of trees up there, so you can see the trees where the trees are surrounded.
Okay. Yeah.
But this year they're going to have an awesome speaker at that memorial service.
Do we?
What's the memorial service? You said
the one at Claiborne's burial place.
I'm gonna go with you. Bum off a ride.
And of course, talking about his legacy, there are a lot of I was just trying to do a search for it. But there are a couple of towns named after him over in Texas. There's a county named after him in Arkansas. There are just people who he was, at least for this area of the country, he was our Stonewall Jackson in the West. I mean, that's the reason why he was called that. I mean, he was a heck of a general.
Well, there's a little bit of lull. We mentioned the book several times, but this is Stonewall of the West by Craig Simons. Yes, Craig Simons. You can get this from the SCV gift store. Go to scv.org and click on the store link. We sell that. along with these nice tumblers that I drink out of. So visit our gift shop and support the cause.
AC with the plug.
Yeah, and there should be even some items on there that help support the new museum, the National Confederate Museum at Elm Springs, where General Claiborne and other Confederate soldiers will have their story told. For more information about that, visit our website, www.scv.org. And of course, if you want to help us reclaim the narrative about Patrick Claiborne and the other different stories and things about our collective American, Southern, and Confederate history, please visit MakeDixieGreatAgain.comnet. I think we own all of them.
We own all of them.
So go there and review it. I'm trying to.
Links are in the chat.
Yeah, links are in the chat. Trying to think of anything else that I have funny stories about General Claiborne. His sword was absolutely gorgeous. His presentation sword. It was actually a
Which
silver.
Which one of them?
The one I'm thinking of, I'll pull it up and send it to the
Because he had
producer.
one that was stolen. He had one that was stolen. It was at a museum in Atlanta. It was a Damascus blade one, and it came up missing a number of years ago. 40, 50 years ago, something like that.
No,
And that was one of his swords.
Yeah, I don't think it was that one that I'm talking about. This is the one with the silver scabbard with the gold hardware.
Okay.
Trying to pull it up.
His men had one made and presented to him when he became general. And at a few battles he was in, he would actually take it off and leave it in the back so it would not become a trophy in case something happened. And it went missing. It went to a museum in Atlanta, and it went missing a number of years ago. Now tell me that's not heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. It's very heartbreaking. It would be like, us losing his kepi. Which museum has it?
Tennessee State Museum.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was preserved by the Tennessee Division Sons of Confederate Veterans, by the way.
Well, good job. Good job, boyos.
Give you all what we used to call in elementary school those silent claps. Teacher wouldn't let us clap, so she would look at us and be like, all right, do the silent clap.
Golf clap.
Golf clap.
Golf clap.
We don't need to mention golf anymore, Bush. I wish we'd have known last weekend there was a course that close. I'd have gotten up there early. The older, sexier version of myself could have for sure caddied for us.
Well, Connor, you and I have a bond to Patrick Claiborne that we haven't discussed.
Okay, shoot.
He was a Mason.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Huh.
He was a Mason when he was in Helena. He was made a Mason. Well, he was working at a pharmacy.
I did not know that.
I believe that's right, isn't it, Adam?
Absolutely correct. And Albert Sidney Pike earned his arts degrees.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Well, do we know if the lodge is still active?
I do not know that. No.
Well, if it is, I know where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I really can't talk about it. Tonight's my stated communication, and I skipped it so I could be with you guys. Well, we only have like 3 people show up anyway, excluding myself. All right, producer, did you get that picture?
Yeah. It just takes me a minute to get it downloaded and get it on my computer. I'm working on that right now. We're trying to show you guys what the sword looks like. See if I can get it zoomed in a little bit better.
I'm willing to bet that this is the one that you're talking about that was stolen. That the one I'm talking about was in Echoes of Glory. There
Hey,
it is.
everybody see that? Is it clear?
Looks good.
But if you actually, if you Google that picture of that sword and you look in on the hardware, there is the harp of Aaron on it. You know that is, his Irish pride.
Is this in private hands now, or is it in a museum?
I'm not sure.
I see where it says Heritage Auctions.
Yeah.
So
If
I'd love to have this at the National Confederate Museum in Columbia, Tennessee.
yes, we would.
Another plug right there. AC's on a roll.
I will even make a deal. If somebody who owns that and it's in private hands, I will even drive to wherever you are and pick it up from you. You don't have to pay shipping or handling or nothing.
I would take that deal.
You get a tax write-off.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's been about 56 minutes or so. According to the timer that's on Twitch. I know that's running a little bit slow. But anyway, closing thoughts. Start with the illustrious J-Bo.
Do not be discouraged. We have men, there's men, the one we just talked about, he did his duty. He was an honorable man. He stood his ground and he did the right thing. That's all we need to do. We just all need to do our duty. Do not be discouraged. Do your duty. That's it.
AS?
I agree with Jason. Just keep doing your duty. And the best thing that we can do now is to educate ourselves. Learn true history. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's becoming more predominant in the popular media and popular culture. But learn the true history. It's out there if you look.
Mr. Producer?
I think we nailed it on the head tonight. He was a pure warrior. He taught us to fight on the front lines for what we believe. And of course, I'll do a AS moment and plug, if you want to fight for your beliefs, you can join us at the www.scp.org.
Well, in closing, appreciate everybody who tuned in. Don't think we had any follow requests, but if you want to continue to follow the channel, please do follow it. Share us with your friends, family, and anybody else you think would enjoy our content. Patrick Claiborne was a great man, and we can only aspire to live up to his example. Next week is another interesting topic. Of course, J-Bo, you are invited back to talk anytime you want. Just let us know, and we'll make sure you're there. But next week's topic is fun with flags. We're going to talk about some of the different flags of the Confederacy. Not only just the national flags and the battle flags, but some of the less well-known ones and some regimental ones. We're going to have another guest from Alabama visiting us. So that'll be fun. It'll be same time, same place. None of us are going out of town, so we won't have to change our schedule.
Thanks.
So let's do this. Hope to see y'all next week. Like I said, battle flags. We'll be talking about it, and we may even get into the how what the flags meant then, what they mean to us now, and not what the neo-Bolshevik Yankees. It's not a complete video till I do that.
Oh gosh, yes.
Not what it means to them. So until then, guys, hope y'all have a great upcoming week. And remember, no Fumar in the elevator.
All right. Thank y'all for having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you, guys.